The Indiana Fever just experienced something so controversial that coach Stephanie White couldn't hold back anymore. What happened on Tuesday night in Indianapolis wasn't just a loss. It was the breaking point that exposed what many have been saying all season about the WNBA's officiating crisis. And when you see what they did to Aliyah Boston in those final minutes, you'll understand why the entire Fever organization is calling this the worst double standard in professional basketball. But here's what nobody's talking about. Sophie Cunningham just revealed something that changes everything about how we view this controversy. Before we dive into what really happened that night, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because what I'm about to show you might be the most important story in the WNBA right now. Picture this. Tuesday night, Gainbridge Fieldhouse, 18,000 fans on their feet. The Fever are down by 1 point with under 3 minutes left. Without Caitlin Clark, without Sydney Colson, who just tore her ACL, without Ari McDonald, who just broke her foot, they're still fighting. Then it happens. Lee Garou from Dallas literally grabs Aliyah Boston's arm, pins it to her side like she's performing a wrestling move, and somehow, the refs called a foul on Boston. The replay showed everything. Garou had Boston's arm completely trapped. Boston couldn't even move. She was literally being held hostage under the basket. The refs review it, everyone in the arena can see what happened on the Jumbotron, and they still maintain the call against Boston. That three-point play became the difference in an 81-80 loss. But that was just the beginning of what would become the most explosive post-game press conference of the season. Stephanie White walked into that media room with fire in her eyes. What she said next sent shockwaves through the league. "I think Aliyah Boston is the worst officiated post player in the league," she said, not holding anything back. "She never gets a call. There's a double standard there, certainly. Think about that for a second." A head coach in a professional league publicly stating that one of her star players is systematically being treated unfairly by officials. That's not something you hear every day, but White wasn't done. She turned her attention to Kelsey Mitchell next. Kelsey Mitchell is held or chucked on every freaking possession and never gets a call off the ball. These aren't small accusations. White is essentially saying the refs have it out for her team, and she's got the receipts to prove it. Earlier in that same game, Sophie Cunningham got called for a flagrant foul on a closeout on Paige Buchers. Minutes later, Mitchell took almost identical contact on a jump shot. No whistle. Zero. Nothing. The inconsistency was so obvious that even the broadcast team was questioning what was happening. But here's where it gets really interesting. Sophie Cunningham, who's become the enforcer and voice of this Fever team, just launched her own podcast called Show Me Something. And in her very first episode, she dropped a truth bomb that nobody saw coming. When asked about the perception of the WNBA and Caitlin Clark's role in it, Cunningham didn't mince words. "It literally pisses me off when people try to argue that she's not the face of our league," Cunningham said, "or that our league would be where we're at without her. You're dumb as you know what." This is huge because it shows the unity within this Fever team. While Clark sits injured, her teammates are fighting not just on the court, but in the media, defending each other and calling out the injustices they're facing. Cunningham has literally been playing point guard, a position she's never played professionally, just to keep this team afloat while their entire backcourt is decimated by injuries. Let me paint you a picture of just how bad the injury situation has gotten. Sydney Colson, season-ending ACL tear. Ari McDonald, broken foot, done for the year. Both injuries happened in the same game against Phoenix. In one night, the Fever lost their backup point guards, the players who were supposed to fill in for Caitlin Clark, while she nurses that groin injury that's kept her out for 20 games this season. The Fever had to make an emergency signing, bringing in Odyssey Sims on a hardship contract. Sims, a former number 2 overall pick, had about 24 hours to learn the playbook before being thrown into game action. She played 13 minutes against Dallas, went scoreless, and looked exactly like someone who had no idea where her teammates wanted the ball because, well, she didn't. And yet, despite all of this, despite having no point guards, despite the controversial officiating, despite everything working against them, the Fever mounted a 17-point comeback against Dallas. They had the game in their hands with 11.7 seconds left, down by 1. This is where another controversial decision comes in. Stephanie White chose not to call timeout. She wanted the team to push in transition, catch Dallas off guard. Kelsey Mitchell, who had already scored 24 points while running the offense from an unnatural position, took a contested jumper that missed. The Fever finally called timeout with 1.7 seconds left. far too late to drop anything meaningful. After the game, White admitted she probably should have called timeout at the 3-second mark. It's rare to see a coach publicly acknowledge a tactical mistake like that, but it shows the pressure this team is under. Every decision is magnified when you're fighting for a playoff spot with a skeleton crew. But let's go back to that officiating controversy because there's more to unpack here. Earlier in the game, there was a sequence that perfectly encapsulated the double standard White was talking about. Paige Buchers appeared to push Cunningham away from her while the Wings had the ball. Cunningham, assuming she'd drawn a foul, was shocked when the whistle went against her instead. You could hear her reaction on the broadcast. She didn't hold back her frustration. Later, Cunningham posted on social media about the incident, showing she's not backing down from calling out what she sees as unfair treatment. "I didn't mean to say the Lord's name in vain, but," she wrote, addressing her on-court outburst. This is a player who's already been fined $1,500 by the WNBA for criticizing officiating on her podcast. She knows there could be consequences, but she's speaking out anyway. And speaking of consequences, the WNBA has been quick to punish Cunningham for her comments, but seemingly slow to address the actual officiating issues that players and coaches are raising. It's created a situation where players feel they can't speak up without facing financial penalties, while the problems they're highlighting continue unchecked. The irony is that Indiana actually shot more free throws than Dallas in that game, 19-15. They were called for fewer fouls too, 17-19. But as White pointed out, it's not about the raw numbers. It's about when the calls come, which calls get made, and the consistency of those calls throughout the game. This isn't the first time the Fever have dealt with questionable officiating. Earlier this season, in a game against Connecticut, former MVP Tina Charles appeared to take a swing at Aliyah Boston. No call. In their playoff series last year, Boston was called for a foul in the opening minute when she clearly got all ball on a rebound attempt. The team had to burn their challenge 60 seconds into a playoff game. There's a pattern here, and it's one that Fever fans have been noticing all season. The question is, why? Why would officials have it out for a team that's bringing record viewership to the league? The Fever are featured in 41 national television games this season, the most in WNBA history. They're the draw, the team everyone wants to watch. So why the apparent bias? Some have suggested it's pushback against the Caitlin Clark phenomenon. The rookie sensation has brought unprecedented attention to the league, but not everyone's happy about it. There's been tension between the old guard and the new wave of fans Clark has brought in. Could that tension be manifesting in how games are officiated? Sophie Cunningham doesn't think it's that complicated. On her podcast, she's been brutally honest about the state of officiating in the WNBA. "They're just so inconsistent," she said. "If you're on the other team and you're going to be fouling the bleep out of me, cool. But let me do it to you." The Fever's situation has gotten so dire that they're playing players out of position just to field a functional lineup. Cunningham, typically a wing, has been running point guard. Mitchell, their primary scorer, has been forced into a facilitator role. Lexi Hull, usually a defensive specialist, is being asked to create offense. It's like watching a chess match where one player has lost half their pieces but is still somehow staying competitive. The fact that they nearly beat Dallas despite all these obstacles is actually remarkable. They outscored the Wings 25-14 in the fourth quarter. Chloe Bibby hit 3 three-pointers in just 12 minutes off the bench. Natasha Howard posted a double-double with 3 blocks. These role players are stepping up in ways nobody expected. But here's what's really fascinating. Despite all the adversity, despite the injuries, despite the controversial calls, this team hasn't quit. They're currently 18-15, sitting in 6th place in the WNBA standings. They're still in the playoff hunt. They're still fighting. Part of that fight comes from the leadership of players like Sophie Cunningham, who's become an unexpected voice for the team. Her transformation this season has been remarkable. She went from being a role player to being the team's enforcer, spokesperson, and emergency point guard all at once. Her willingness to speak out, even knowing she'll face fines, shows the kind of culture this Fever team has built. And about that culture, it's worth noting that this team has each other's backs in a way that's rare in professional sports. When Clark went down with her injury, Cunningham immediately stepped up. When Boston gets hammered in the post with no calls, Mitchell fights harder on the perimeter. When the refs make a questionable call, the bench reacts as one. Even Clark, sitting injured on the sideline, was seen clapping forcefully at referee Amy Bonner after the final buzzer of the Dallas game. The Fever have become must-watch television not just because of their talent, but because of their resilience. Every game feels like they're playing against two opponents, the team across from them and the officials calling the game. And somehow, they keep finding ways to stay competitive. Looking ahead, the challenges aren't getting any easier. Clark's return date remains uncertain. The team's medical staff is being cautious with her groin injury, prioritizing her long-term health over short-term gains. Without her, the Fever are essentially running an NBA offense through two shooting guards and a forward who learned point guard duties on the fly. But there's hope on the horizon. The addition of Odyssey Sims, while rough in her debut, gives them at least some backcourt depth. She's a veteran who's been in big games before. Once she gets acclimated to the system, she could be the stabilizing force they need to weather this storm until Clark returns. The bigger question is whether the officiating will improve. Stephanie White's public comments were a calculated risk. She knew she might face fines or punishment from the league, but she felt it was necessary to protect her players. Sometimes, shining a light on a problem is the only way to force change. The league now has a choice. They can either address the concerns being raised by one of their most visible franchises, or they can continue to let the controversy fester. With the playoffs approaching and viewership at an all-time high, the stakes couldn't be bigger. For Fever fans, Tuesday night's loss was about more than just one game. It was about fairness, consistency, and respect. When you watch your team battle through historic injury, adversity, only to lose on questionable calls, it leaves a bitter taste. When your coach has to publicly call out officiating bias just to get attention to the problem, you know something's seriously wrong. But if there's one thing this Fever team has shown, it's that they won't back down. They'll keep fighting, keep speaking out, and keep pushing forward. Because at the end of the day, that's what Indiana basketball is all about: grit, determination, and never accepting anything less than a fair shot. The question now is whether the WNBA will listen. Will they address the officiating concerns that are threatening to overshadow one of the most exciting seasons in league history? Or will teams like the Fever continue to feel like they're playing with a different set of rules? One thing's for certain: with Sophie Cunningham speaking her mind, Stephanie White calling out injustices, and Caitlin Clark waiting in the wings to return, this story is far from over. The Fever might be wounded, but they're not defeated. And sometimes the most dangerous team is the one with nothing left to lose. What do you think? Are the refs really biased against the Fever, or is this just the frustration of a team dealing with unprecedented adversity? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to see more coverage of this developing story, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Because trust me, what happens next could change everything for the Indiana Fever and the WNBA.